Good day and welcome to the MSL podcast. My name is Malka, I'm joined here with Justin. Today we're going to discuss the digital divide. So Justin, tell us what is the digital divide, how it came to be, and what can we do to fix it?
So the digital divide can eloquently be described as the gulf between those who have access to a computer and an internet connection and those who do not. Basically what this comes down to is the fact that certain people have access to ICT capabilities, certain people can use computers to better themselves, to earn an income, for various other resource purposes, and some simply cannot. How this came about is in developed countries where the average income would be higher and the cost for acquiring ICT would be a lot lower. It would mean that these people had, a first preference in getting hold of access, and this access allowed them to do things that in developing countries people might have not been able to.
Okay.
So where the gap comes to be is, let's say in the US they got Google in 95, but in South Africa you only got it in 2005. There was a 10-year skills gap there already, right? If that was the case, for example. Now in South Africa we know that we pay a lot more for technology. We know that not many people have access to technology the way some do. Now in our country already there's a digital divide, right? There's a digital divide between those who have the money to have access and those who don't. And worldwide this gap is a lot bigger if you look at it between the lowest of the low and the highest of the high. But just in a South African context alone, it's already pretty big. You see, people are fighting for resources. By resources, I mean people are looking for food, water, basic housing, access to sanitation. So IT might not be a need, it's not first on their mind of, I need an internet connection. We still have people that are doing matric by candlelight kind of thing, where we have people that have access to 200 megabyte a second line speed and the brand newest laptop every time it comes out. Now, the reason the digital divide is so important, or why it has an effect, is because of the opportunities that the digital world creates. So if you look at it, you can't go into digital marketing without having a computer. Similarly, you could not do a proper research report without a computer unless you went to a library to use a library computer, for example. In a case like South Africa, where our libraries and public services aren't very well equipped, we tend to have a greater issue. And also, besides the fact that people have to get transport to libraries, it becomes a hassle. And when things become a hassle, people aren't going to do it when they're still focusing on not starving to death. Now, my biggest issue with the digital divide is I feel like it's a driver behind inequality. So you can't have an equal society if you don't have equal access to opportunities. So that's kind of where I start my thought process and say, well, if we want everybody to be able to better themselves, we need to give them these access to these opportunities to better themselves, right? To earn a living. We have so many fields that have opened up in the last 10, 20 years relating to IT. One of the newest ones, data analysis, for example. Being proficient in things like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, it can land you a job, or it can be make or break. So many jobs have requirements like this where you need to understand the use of a computer, because you're going to work on a computer that they are giving you, but you're going to need to know how to use these kinds of things. Now, how do you teach these kinds of things when someone hasn't had any access to it whatsoever? And on top of that, you might think, wow, this is easy. I can use Word. I've used Word all my life, right? But they never had Word. They never had a computer.
Yeah.
So things you might not even have needed a special education program for, it was implied knowledge. So what happens when these kids get to university on a bursary and they've never made use of Microsoft Word before? Now you've got to start that learning process over. So there is a big influence that the gap has that you can express in terms of extremes. So you can say someone that's never seen a computer before and someone that's always had access to a computer. But then there's also subtle differences. in first year, for example, we had a Excel, based class, and if they taught you to use Excel, but you had to, if you didn't know how to use Excel before, you'd have to put in a lot of extra effort.
Yeah.
See, so there's minor differences as well, where that gap can be largely expressed in an economic sense as well. So if we look at Taiwan, they're like the data hotspot of the world, and Taiwan's economy is thriving based on the fact that they make use of data analytics and other kinds of things. But then we might look at a poorer African country or poorer South American country, somewhere where there might be very limited access, or where they live in a very remote location, and then you might find that they have access to basic jobs, things like mining, things like industry, things like factory work. They won't be able to have service industry jobs that are a lot more favorable now, or that earn a lot more. So the impact can be seen on like a level of one country can thrive so much better from having access to ICT, where another country that might not have access or might struggle for access will be left behind in the sense of a whole country, regardless of if people in that country have access to these kinds of things.
Yes, and then that ties in with the whole coronavirus, working remotely, and that how do you suggest government on a government level, and then the whole world's economy, how do we solve this divide country to country and then within South Africa?
Well, I think personally we need to start treating the internet as less of a luxury, and access to computers as less of a luxury and more as a basic need. We need to start tying it in with basic things like housing, sanitation, water, food. To be able to get there, I understand that issues like housing, food and water need to be solved first.
Yes.
They obviously need priority, people need to have a sustainable livelihood. But I think that through incentivization programs, the government can, for example, invest in ICT infrastructure in a country. And as such, it should create jobs for not only people that are building this ICT infrastructure and obviously the materials behind them, all those kinds of things, but also that it creates a new stem of jobs. So if you look at it, it's like extra branches on the tree of jobs available in the country, where people can start applying for different kinds of jobs and stuff, and it opens up more and more jobs. I think stimulating the economy in that way will automatically lead to more and more prioritization of these kinds of things, and then we should be able to see the gap close. The gap will never be null and void, it will never be zero, it will never be tight. There'll always be wealth gaps or interest gaps, in terms of maybe your interest is more in sport than into computers and stuff, and you might never really feel the need to learn, but you always have a basic understanding. And then we have primary education, which is a big thing for me. In South Africa, our primary education system is not good. Our secondary education system is not good. Many people aren't finishing high school. I understand that not everyone's academic, and we need access to technical schools and things like that as well. But I think digital literacy is very important. I don't think it's prioritized enough in our primary education or secondary education system. And then I feel like once you get to university, it's a requirement.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I think that subjects like IT and CAT at school weren't sufficient, or IT was more for programming side, but CAT, for example, wasn't sufficient because it wasn't something that was taught to everyone. It was more of a choice. I feel that digital literacy programs should start at first grade level already. We're seeing private schools are using laptops, tablets, things like that to conduct their work entirely, and what that gives you is it gives you an advantage in terms of familiarizing yourself with technology. Whereas in public schools, you're not seeing the same kind of thing. And with this, again, you're having that divide starting at that age already. You're having that divide start and just bridge up. So if you can't solve it there, you're not going to solve it when someone's 25 and looking for a job.
Yeah.
I do, however, think that programs after work or after our programs can be efficient. We've seen it with language classes. People often do language classes in certain countries where people can after work go and learn how to speak a language fluently. I think that we can do something similar in terms of digital literacy. I think the average human has more than enough capacity to understand the basics of computer literacy, and in the ICT environment, things are becoming ever more user-friendly. So I feel like that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is from a private perspective. I think that companies like Google or the parent company's Alphabet, I think they've started recently with digital skills, programs that are for free, like little certificates online that you can do, which contributes towards digital literacy. It obviously doesn't solve the root issue of giving people a computer and giving people internet access.
Because they still need access to the computers.
Yes, that being said though, people that might be 45, 50, that may have never needed to use a computer, that are using things more now, that might want to bridge out, or people that have had a business for years and years that never had a website might start bridging out, so they create more users for themselves. So personally, I think that companies like Google can actually look to investing in large-scale IT infrastructure in developing countries. Why? Because it tends to lead to economic prosperity for them as well.
Yes.
Because then at the end of the day, they get more end users. So that's something I'd really like to see. Fiber, when it came out in South Africa, has been very expensive. We know that ADSL isn't really adequate anymore. 5G is rolling out now. We've got multiple advancements, and this is another fact that I actually forgot about earlier, is when technology rapidly changes, right? And it does. Like, we know how quickly something gets old. People get left behind very quickly. I still have a laptop that works. Maybe it's 10 years old. Someone's like, wow, why are you using that outdated laptop? And I'm like, well, it still works for my purposes, but he's using something that's so much more advanced, with so much more capabilities. So maybe someone can only afford a laptop that's still 10 years old.
Yeah.
Where someone can afford a laptop that's brand new and can keep up with the trends. With trends, people tend to get left behind very quickly. Look at, let's say, take your grandfather's fashion sense to your fashion sense. It's a very easy way to describe it. He's wearing something that was popular back then. You're wearing something that's more popular now. It's such like a small thing. You would think, oh, it doesn't have really any impact. But when it comes to technology, it has a really big impact.
Yeah. And then on a global scale, just quickly, how do we bridge from an African country that's been left behind to Taiwan that's the data hub of the world?
Well, you see, in one way, I think we need to secure foreign investment. I do think foreign investment will aid countries where they might not have the abilities to, provide for themselves when they're still busy worrying about their people eating and having like adequate housing. So I feel like it is a large market for foreign investors to come in. People tend to have a little bit of a negative connotation around foreign investment sometimes. Not always, but maybe people that tend to think, oh, well, now we owe them something for coming here. Not always the case. If a massive company comes into South Africa and maybe they provide free internet access for large geographical areas where it might not have been previously, capable, they usually have an end product that, by granting you this access to these things, generally generates more end users for them, like I said earlier. So they are investing, but they're investing so that they get more users, right?
This is like Google coming into South Africa.
Exactly, yes. So it's very similar. And I think on a global scale, that's going to be the quickest way to catch things up. I found that overseas, the market for internet is slowly becoming more and more competitive. People are reaching out, going to different places. I think we're still in a very developmental stage. However advanced we think we are, we're in a very developmental stage when it comes to wireless technologies. And I think that it's only a matter of time before foreign companies come into African countries, into South American countries, into certain Asian countries that might be more remote. And I feel like that would be the best way to, in terms of connecting the world. I spoke already about e-commerce and how outsourcing has become such a big thing in the last 10-20 years for your digital needs. And I feel that those kinds of things can bridge gaps between those that might not necessarily have the skills but might have the money, and those that have the skills and don't have the money. It's financial literacy and digital literacy are two things that really need to be prioritized. And I really feel like digital literacy is the next step towards making sure that people aren't being left behind in terms of like where we're going as a future economy and as a growing economy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for joining. Please feel free to subscribe and press the like button, and then we'll join you in 2 weeks again for the next podcast. Thank you.